Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup, where Ian and D-Days are going to ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. This is episode 65 coming at you, and we've got Ian Wilks, who's going to co-host. The church, LDS Church abuse rates of sexual abuse, that has made the news once again. We're going to talk about that. We're going to give you a bunch of temple updates. And also, the United Kingdom has formally announced that they're doing background checks for persons who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who will be working with children. We're also going to give you some breaking news here from some inside sources, including potential female callings that are open to women that never have been open to women before. And also breaking, there's a Preach My Gospel updates. There's a role of technology in advancing and accelerating the church. We've got an absolutely fantastic episode for you. And I'd like to bring onto the program here Ian Wilks. Ian, welcome to the Mormon News Roundup.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, Davis.
Oh, that's tremendous. And so you kind of made the rounds here. You were a part of a stake presidency, and you're also the host of Inside Out. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm from the UK originally. I grew up in a socialist, working class coal mining community in the north of England, in a small village called Airedale, town called Castleford. It's an interesting community. Quite a tough community. Grew up on a council estate. I'm not sure if you know what that is in the US. I'm not sure what that would be. It's basically state or government funded housing. So it was quite, a poor neighborhood. Working class and quite a tough community, and an area where the missions were instructed not to tract, not to go. Yet they did, and they found me, and I joined the church against the advice and support of my family at the age of 16. This is in the 80s. And long story short, I was thrown out of the house for joining the church. It was an interesting time. I slept on a park bench for 2-3 nights, slept on a friend's couch, and then Bishop in the local ward got wind of my plight and took me in, and I rented a room and basically went through all the programs of the church, and it was great experience. I was in seminary for a couple of years. I served a mission in Scotland in the late 80s. Came back. I was a branch president on the mission, and then I got released. So I think I'm still a branch president after 35 years ago. And then came home, got married, sealed in the London Temple, and served a different calling. Served as a bishop for quite a number of years. That was in Scotland, and moved to Canada in 2006, 2007, and was called within months, actually, quite to my surprise and other surprise, other people's surprise, called to serve in a stake presidency, and so did that for quite a while, and then discovered some issues, did some investigation, and decided that the church was lacked integrity in certain areas, and decided that to keep my integrity, I couldn't be part of an organization that wasn't completely honest and truthful about certain things. And so I decided to resign. I resigned my membership in 2016, 2017. My family are out. I'm out. On my wife's side, they're all active in the church, bishops, and there's other, they're all active, very much involved in the church. My side of the family, they never joined the church. It was just me that joined the church at that time. And so I, left the church, and recently I had an idea of creating or launching a podcast with a missionary companion of mine, Jim Bennett, who you know pretty well. Jim's much more well known than I am. He's more of a professional podcaster than I am. And so I thought it would be a good idea to do the podcast. It was called Inside Out. He's on the inside, I'm on the out. And the intent was to ultimately help people navigate their issues, answer tough questions, get into some of the detail in terms of what's behind the policies and procedures and the processes, some of the thinking, provide a unique and distinct perspective from a leadership perspective in regards to how the church thinks. Serving on a stake presidency, you get to work with temple presidents and mission presidents and general authorities and apostles. I was set apart and called by Elder Oakes in 2010, I think it was. Elder Cook was his junior companion at the time. So I spent some time with those two individuals and other general authorities and getting trained and seeing how the church operates in a leadership level, which is often, well, it's quite different than a lot of people's experiences in terms of, the general membership. It's a very different world, I think, is the leadership. So the Inside Out is there to provide a different perspective, look at the opportunities for change and improvement in the church, criticize constructive the church where it needs to change and improve, but certainly highlight the qualities, where the church gets things right. And it does a lot of things, really good things, is to talk about that and to give it credit where it's deserved, but really to be a voice to influence the church for the better, if that's possible, and to improve it so it's a better experience for people.
I did look up your stake presidency information. By the way, if you go back to the Church News Archives, they announced the stake presidencies, and this was back in 2011. You scroll down, and if you scroll down to these stake presidents back there, you scroll all the way to the bottom, you're going to find Mr. Vernon, British Columbia stake, April 17th, 2011, President Andrew Draper, and then the first counselor, David H. Smith. And then I see a certain individual, Ian Wilks, 45A business owner, and his wife, Debbie Owens Wilks. So, yeah, that was 2011. Time flies, huh?
Yeah, time flies. I thought it was 2010, but yeah, it's gone by quick. I think I left in 2017 or maybe 2018, I think it was. So, yeah, I've been out by 5 years of the church. So the stake presidency, again, that was an extraordinary experience, mostly positive, but not entirely. So,
just a small trivia. You served your mission in Scotland, and I just want to let you know that my father also served a mission in Scotland. He was there in 1961 to 1963. So I think that's a little ahead of your time, right?
A little bit ahead of my time. Yes, that's the church has been there for a long time. I think. Going way back, to the Parley P. Pratt, I think it was, going all the way back. The church has got a long history in Scotland. David B. Haight was the mission president there. Bernie P. Brockbank was the mission president there. My mission president was Ben B. Banks, Joel Dunn, who was the brother of Lawrence C. Dunn. Actually, it was Joel Dunn's son that brought me into the church, incidentally. That was when I was 16, and a few years later, his dad was my mission president in Scotland. And then he was released by Elder Ballard in July 87 in Edinburgh, Scotland. The mission was reorganized, restructured, and Ben B. Banks was called, and he was an extraordinary mission president. And then he was called as a general authority, I think, in July 89. I'd gone home by then, and he became a significant leader in the church in Australia, I think area president, and he was also, I think, on the Quorum of the 70 or the presidency of the Quorum of the 70. I'm not quite sure. But again, you can Google all about Ben B. Banks. He was a Jordan mission temple president, rather. And it was also the church's, I'm not sure what the official name is, but it was the individual, the nickname is a greeter. So basically, this is a person that organizes and meets and facilitates meetings between the first presidency and prime ministers and presidents and leaders of countries, and organizes meeting with NGOs around the world on behalf of the first presidency. So Ben B. Banks, again, extraordinary individual, wonderful man, very kind, very caring, very close to the first presidency at the time, especially Elder Packer, who called him into that calling. And it was just wonderful to have Ben B. Banks as a mission president. And so the podcast which I'm doing with Jim Bennett and I, he brings a very distinct and a very unique perspective. His family's been in the church for generations. His history in the church and family history is very different to mine. He's got a political background. His father was a senator. Him and I served our missions together in Scotland. I come from a completely different background. Convert, working class. Very different, a different country, different accent, different culture completely. And so I think we bring that, or we try to bring some of those qualities into the podcast to talk about, explore things that have already been discussed, but from a different perspective. talk about things that have only been covered to some extent, so bring new fresh perspectives and new dimensions into topics that have only been maybe discussed, not in great length or great detail. But the other third piece to that is to bring new information, new intelligence, new knowledge and information about what the church is doing or trying to do. And there's a couple of things that I want to highlight or bring into the podcast here, which I think is quite new and quite hot off the press. I don't think a couple of the items I want to kind of mention has been discussed or even referenced before. So we'll see what the reaction is to those that new stuff that we've got.
Yeah, your ratings on Apple podcasts are very, very high, and I've listened to, I think, almost every one of your episodes. I think you have 13 episodes now, and I'm a big Jim Bennett fan, and I think you guys are doing a tremendous job. I wish you the very, very best. And I also wish you the best with our Mormon News Joke of the Week. I understand you've got that for us, right?
I do. It's I've got a few jokes, but this one is more of a device. This is a story, an experience, quite an embarrassing experience. I wasn't there, but it was relayed to me by one of the counselors actually in the stake presidency shared this with us. And it was difficult to stop laughing when we heard the story. And in fact, through the stake presidency meeting that lasts several hours, we kind of chuckled and giggled throughout the meeting. So here's the story. So in the stake where I was called, and this, I wasn't there, but this was relayed to me by one of the other counselors. There was a fast and testimony meeting, and you probably know that the counselors get the stake president delegates or can delegate units to one counselor and delegate other units to another counselor. We had a north-south divide split between me and the other counselor. And you go to these meetings and you preside at the meeting. You have to sit on the stand. And during fast and testimony meeting, where I prefer to be with my family, you are required to sit on the stand and to preside at the meeting. And so one of the counselors was at a fast and testimony meeting, and this senior sister, this older lady, got up and in a very quite a somber, very serious look on her face, looked at the congregation and put her hands on the pulpit and said, "Brothers and sisters, I wonder if you could help us as a family. I would appreciate it if you would pray for my husband's scrotum."
Whoa, wait a minute. That really happened?
Yep.
Wow.
So this is what really happened. And so I think most of the members didn't hear this. I mean, it's just extraordinary, to say something
Oh, boy.
at a fast and testimony. And then she said, "Yeah, it's causing me a lot of pain. It's itching at night.
I can imagine.
He has cream on it, etc., and we really need your faith and prayers to for this problem to heal." He's seen the doctor, and she's talking about this. And by this time, there's quite a bit of a silence. The congregation goes silent. People are looking at each other. It's very awkward, as you can imagine. The atmosphere's changed somewhat. The spirit's probably left by now. And so the sister and the bishop's looking, what the heck is going on? And the other counselor is looking across at the bishop, wondering what is going on? What do we do? And this sister was deeply, very, very beloved in the ward and just deeply respected, wonderful sister. And she said, "Please pray, for my, my husband's scrotum. He needs your help. And if you can do that, we'd be grateful." She then bore a testimony, then closed and sat down. And then her husband stood up and walked slowly, somewhat embarrassingly, to the pulpit and leaned forward and said, "Brothers and sisters, sternum."
Oh.
Sternum. So, the congregation laughed. Everybody burst out laughing. I wasn't there. This was related. And the counselor shared this with the stake presidency, and we just laughed and laughed.
Yeah.
I knew the person that they were talking about. And so he said, "It's my sternum, brothers and sisters. I've got a problem with sternum. I need to go for an operation." And so that was funny. And so you see things like that, that happens from time to time. And so I think I won't stop. That was it. That was the funny story. And it was, I wasn't there, but it must have been quite extraordinary experience.
That just reminds me of the Book of Mormon musical, when the second half of the musical, when he talks about maggots. I won't get into that because that's a little too gory, but yeah, that did remind me of that. Now, if you want to get in touch with your humble host here, you can send me an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org, or you can come on over to our website. We're at www.mormonnewsroundup.org. We'd be delighted to hear from you. If you have articles that you want us to cover on our next Mormon News Roundup, we'd be happy to cover them if you will submit those to us. And that does take us to our first news article here. And this was very interesting here, Ian. Jennifer Rose, she's back at it again. She's written in Public Square magazine, and she keeps writing about LDS Church abuse rates. And the title of the headline here is, "I Know How to Lower Church Abuse Rates by 75%. And that's quite a clickbait title here. And she has a number of suggestions that I thought that we could briefly go over. Number one is, she says that the church has been talking about this for a long time, and that's helped. And also, she talks about number two, most churches are not organized geographically, what the LDS Church is, which means you can't bounce around from congregation to congregation to find new victims. So the LDS structure of having your stake, of being assigned a stake, a ward, she says that would help other churches. Sustaining people who work with children as a public announcement, that's a positive step, she says. And that because the church uses callings versus volunteering, that's also a positive step. And because most people who work with children in the church are married, well, married people have less rates of abuse. And she also talks about how the church also utilizes female leadership. Those are her 6 steps here, Ian, to reducing church abuse rates. I know you read this article. How do you feel about Jennifer's approach here, Ms. Roach's approach to lowering church abuse rates?
Yeah, I did some research on this. I read this, and I think her intent is good, but I think it's riddled. Comments there, or thoughts are riddled with holes. If you look at the first one, she's admitting that the long before mandatory reporting laws, background checks were in place, quote, the church was already thinking of these issues way back in 1985 with the child abuse help for ecclesiastical leaders material. Well, if that's the case, why didn't the church register ahead of all the laws and regulations? We might get into that on this podcast. Why didn't the church lead the way, show the initiative, and actually have those who were called into serving with children or minors and youth? Why didn't they do background checks back then? They didn't. And so if they knew about these issues back then, why didn't they have training in place? Why didn't they do the background checks then? Why are they not ahead of the curve in regards to dealing with these issues if they knew it back then? And remember, the church has repeatedly said, doesn't say it anymore now, that in section 130, that is the only true and living church upon the face of the earth. In the Temple Recommend questions, it's clear that the question around, you sustain the prophet is the only person on the earth who's got the keys of the kingdom, etc. So the prophet has got the head of the curve. He knows what's going on out there. He's got direct hotline to God. They can see the issues ahead, etc. Clearly, they did back then in 1985. Notwithstanding, they didn't do anything back then. And in fact, it took government legislation to put pressure on the church which is what's happening in the UK, to put pressure on church, not just the church, but other organizations, faith-based organizations and other companies and other charities whose people do work with youth. That inspiration came from government, and it certainly didn't come from any faith that I can see. If you look what's happening in the Catholic Church, again, it was legislation across the world, in certain parts of the world, that brought these organizations to account. It was the revelation, if you like, that was given to government ministers rather than the prophet on the earth. That's on the first one. And then if you look at the second one, existing associations there, again, a description of how churches are organized, across geographies is not quite accurate. She claims that the way the church is structured and organized, makes it very difficult for an abuser to be called into these callings, these volunteer callings. I completely disagree. I think until recently, it's been very easy for people to get called into these callings. Certainly, you got places in the world where they're struggling with leadership, they're struggling to even fill callings. And so if you say yes to some of the callings, you get the calling extended. You've got serious calling gaps across the world, like in UK and certainly across Europe. And anyone that says yes to accepting a calling, they get the calling. It's more about filling it's more administrative than it is spiritual. I think that's changing now with these laws, but we can't look to the church to show the leadership. It's really following the legislation that's happening in certain parts of the world. Where countries don't have that legislation, the church is not obligated to do background checks. Other questions that are really important in this respect is in regards to training bishops and stake presidents and volunteers and people that work with youth and children. Who's delivering that training? Where's that training coming from? Is it an external organization that's providing the training?
A lot of it is online. It's just an online 30-minute module.
Sure, but it's not. It's not an outside organization that's delivering that, right?
Right.
So it's basically a bank. It's like a company regulating itself. Who's doing the training? Is the training meeting all the professional standards? No, it's not. What is the outcome from the training? Where's the mechanism for measuring the decrease in abuse that's going on in the church? So the church is professing to be or trying to be transparent only within its own processes and own regulations, but it won't open up its organization to external training organizations that've got the professional skills, because it doesn't want to show its inner workings of the church. And so it's trying to be transparent in word to an extent, indeed, but without that external oversight, you won't get the transparency that people need, and we all need. We want to see that, and it's concerned about the accountability. It's going to regulate and manage its own its own activity in this area. So it is an important step forward. It is encouraging. It is progress. But let's do full transparency. Let's completely open. Let's get an external organization in. Let's see what the real issues are within the church, and let's uncover that. And let's see, let's see the facts rather than having that information managed and contained by the church. The other thing as well, sustaining as a public announcement. Well, yeah, you put the name forward before the bishopric for the individual being called. You don't know whether or not whether their background is, whether they've got any history in regards to sexual assault necessarily. That's only privy to the bishop. Often it's not the councillors. It's privy to it's available to the stake presidency, and we'll get into that. There's reasons why the stake presidency have that. The bishop usually will know that, but his councillors may not know that. The membership won't know the person's background who had been called to the calling. And if they do, the culture is you don't vote against people being called. I've been in the callings that I have. Rarely, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but rarely do you see people delivering an opposing vote when somebody's called. It just doesn't happen very often. We look at the members and they all put their hand up and they sustain them. So you can't rely on sustaining as a public announcement to weed out these types of individuals. There's also a point 4 there, calling versus volunteering. Well, I don't see the difference between the two. The calling is volunteering. These are lay members, and again, using that as a I don't fully understand what she's saying in terms of what the difference is there between calling and volunteering and how that protects children. It just doesn't. The church is very much a soft target. The whole point of the church is to be friendly, to be warm, to invite people in, and to extend a hand of friendship and fellowship. And look at the structure, look at the organization, look at the training, look at the motives and the goals there. The objective is to get people into callings as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you lose retention. So you baptize them. And one of the main criteria for retaining people is to extend a calling as quickly as possible. Bishops are under pressure to get these people into calling. So I don't think, the process. I think it's an important step forward in terms of the church acknowledging the need to do background checks in certain countries, but it's only doing that because it has to. And
let me just say, first of all, she has 6 points that she says will lower church abuse rates. But you've talked a great deal about background checks. That was not one of her suggestions. What most people consider to be the overwhelming easiest thing to do that will catch the most amount of people, she completely ignores. It's not even number one on her list. It doesn't even make the top 6.
She mentions background checks on point 1. She says they're long before mandatory reporting laws and background checks. So she makes reference to it on the material, on the source that I've got, which is the Meridian magazine, which is LDS magazine. So she just make reference to it. It's there.
She says long before anyone was doing background checks, leaders talked about it. But one of her steps to reduce abuse was not conducting mandatory background checks for everyone who has the potential to be around kids. And most people would consider that to be the number one, not number 6, not number 5. The number one thing. She completely leaves it off. It's hard to take the rest of this article seriously when she doesn't really even deal with the elephant in the room. It
is. I couldn't agree more. She makes reference to it, but she doesn't deal with it, and it's not a priority. And again, if you look at number 5, she talks about the traditional, conventional, family unit, biological parents, and kids staying in that traditional family setting compared to being in a different setting where they're prone to risk. And I think there are some studies to support that. And the other interesting thing, which I think is fascinating, Divis, is the number 6, which is female leadership. In that section there, she's suggesting that she's saying the vast majority of sexual abuse is committed by men, and that is true. Yes, there are women abusers, but 99 out of 100 abusers are male, and I think that's pretty reliable. She goes on to say most church youth groups leadership who sets the general culture is entirely male, and there are likely female volunteers around the world, but they do not hold the same kind of responsibility. So if you look at that section on there, she's basically arguing or advocating for more female leaders to be in decision roles to influence policy, procedure, and influence activities and events. And I agree with that. I think there's a really important role for female leaders to get into senior leadership roles, influence policy, influence process, make those decisions. And I think a female leader will bring more protection. I agree with that. And so she's advocating for more leadership and authority for female leaders. I don't think she's aware she's doing that, but in that last section, that's very clear to me. That's what she's trying to do, and I support that. So yeah, I take this with a pinch of salt, but there are some aspects of this, elements of this, which I see some value in regards to what she's trying to do here. But yeah,
there definitely is some value in some of her points, but the biggest overall point is the background checks, and she does not hammer that home. She ignores it. And we've seen in the UK here that the church finally announced here just a couple of days ago on 20th of June, 2023, thanks to that mostly female leadership that you spoke about of the Brett Ventures, the Europe North Area Presidency has updated their safeguarding policies and procedures with regards to running background checks here. And this is from the church's official webpage. And this was released again by the Europe North Area Presidency here. And this has just been a tremendous boon to, the United Kingdom. And it basically, this is the type of thing that needs to be outsourced to other municipalities, other countries, and other states.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, we're looking at legislation now. So in Scotland, they brought out the Disclosure Scotland Act, I think, back in 2005, and that made it mandatory for faith-based organizations and other organizations to register for those deadlines. And so I think England's doing this now, but I think it originated in Scotland way back then. And so you have to do these background checks, and I've seen those. I've been involved in those in the past, and I have a little bit of insight into that, which I want to share on a podcast that I'm doing with Jim Bennett. I want to get into some of that detail. But again, it's legislation that's leading the way. It's not revelation. It's not the prophet. In countries where that's not required, the church is not doing background checks. And you're right. The number one thing that you can do is to do background checks. The background checks, if the person hasn't been caught, then those background checks will not detect, any history. If they have been caught or cautioned, or there's any complaints to history, that would come up if it's been if it's been registered, or if a complaint's been made about that individual. If you look at the policy procedures with the Europe North area presidency, again, they're not. It's not. They don't give you the details, the mechanics. They don't talk extensively about the need to release people from the callings before they do background checks. I think that's important. They don't talk about, again, any outside external training organization to come in to monitor, to determine if that training internally is being delivered professionally to the professional standards. The reality is it isn't. Bishops, stake presidents, youth leaders are not trained professionally. They can't give the counseling. They can give some emotional support, some spiritual support, but dealing with, and I've dealt with a lot of issues and abuse-related issues. These individuals are in significant pain, and they need professional help. And if you haven't got the training, the formal training, or the resources to give that level of support, then you really you can actually make a bad situation worse. I'll give you an example here. Why there's so much sexual abuse, or why it's so common in the Mormon Church. One is the reputation of the church comes first. When Elder Oakes called me into the room with Elder Cook and called me onto the stake presidency, have a guess what the first question was that he asked me? Have a guess.
Something with regards to your background. Do you have anything embarrassing in your background?
That's it. Is there anything in my background, my history, that could harm the reputation of the church? Number one question. That was it. So the reputation comes first. The preservation of the institution is most paramount. And remember, we're talking about probably the most important issue, which is protecting children. We're talking about sexual abuse of adults and children, etc. And in regards to legal risk and other risks, there's probably not anything more important than that in respect to threatening or risking the church. The second item, again, from my experience, is bishops are not always required by law to report sexual abuse. There should be an international standard in terms of policies and procedures that have been reviewed and vetted by external organizations that are aligned with legislation that is across all of the world, regardless whether the legislation exists in the country or not, where bishops and stake presidents, others are required under the regulations of the church to do background checks, for the church to do background checks, and the training delivered to youth leaders and bishops, etc., delivered by an external, approved, accredited organization that is professionally trained to deliver this kind of training. The church is not doing that. It can do that. It's got the resources, for goodness sake, to do that. $150 billion in its war chest, it can do that. The problem is it's regulating transparency, and it's regulating its accountability. It's controlling that. It will not give up that or allow an external organization to come in and review its processes and practices, which is, I hope, will happen. And the last one, there's two actually. The other one is forgiveness is a pillar of the faith. If you look at the materials, from the very beginning right through to present, all the materials, doctrine, policies, processes, they're all replete with examples of forgiveness. President Nelson recently on the church website is focusing on forgiveness. We're all required to forgive. And if you look at the church handbook of instructions, and I've researched that for this podcast, the specific references to forgiving perpetrators of sexual abuse. As Christians, it says we're required to forgive. So you've got this culture of forgiveness, and if you don't forgive, you yourself can't expect forgiveness from the Lord. So that is that's that. The other one is regarding the talk that was given by Richard Scott. Stake presidents and bishops should ensure that what they say about abuse is based. Sorry, let me go back. Reading the church website, I'll quote it here on the church website, which is under the safeguarding and protecting of children. It's under the abuse, help, healing, protection section of the church website, and also the handbook of instructions. It says that stake presidents and bishops should ensure that what they say about abuse is based on church doctrine. Very important that the materials referred to in this policy should form the basis of all the training. So if it's all rooted in church doctrine, and church doctrine is delivered by leaders, apostles, listen to this. So Richard G. Scott, who was a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, highest ranking body men in the church after the first presidency, Elder Scott presented a talk entitled Healing the Tragic Scars of Abuse. That was in April 1992 General Conference. 16 years later, he gave a similar talk, watered down version actually, in April 2008 conference. And he regurgitated a newer version of the talk that was given in 1992. And both talks contain numerous examples of dangerous, misleading, abusive, uneducated advice. He says this, which is extraordinary. Jim and I have talked about this on our podcast, where we identified scriptures in the canon of scriptures, which are actually awful scriptures that should be removed, like Moroni 9:9, for example. So this is what Elder Scott said in his talk. The victim must do all in his or her power to stop the abuse. Most often, the victim is innocent because of being disabled by fear or the power or authority of the offender. At some point in time, however, the Lord may prompt the victim to recognize a degree of responsibility for the abuse. The priesthood leader will help you assess your responsibility so that, if needed, it can be addressed. I won't continue the rest of the quote there, but it's disgusting, it's grotesque, it's awful. If the policies and procedures are rooted in church doctrine, and this is church doctrine that we've been taught by Richard Scott, then there's a significant element of this which is victim blaming, which is absolutely awful and disgusting. The church should disavow itself formally from those kind of remarks. So, is the church doing enough? No. Is it making small steps? Yes. Is it controlling? Is it regulating? Is it monitoring? Its level of risk and exposure? Absolutely. Will it allow independent organizations to come in and look at the church in more detail? I don't see that ever happening. Not in the foreseeable future. So, yeah, this is a major problem, and the church, still having known about this and being the only true living church on the face of the earth, isn't doing enough, frankly, to protect children. And other organizations are leaving it behind. You've got so many organizations that are being much more proactive and showing much more leadership and innovation around protecting children. Yet the only true church on the face of the earth is still dragging its feet, and some of it's just lip service. So anyway.
I really appreciate your thoughts. Those are good thoughts for our listeners out there. If you'll drop us a comment in the YouTube or wherever it is that you find this, let us know what you think that the church should be doing to protect children. Should we be following what Mrs. Roach said about those 6 steps? Should we be doing background checks? Let us know in the comment sections. We'd be very grateful for that. Now, our next article here, Ian, is really made the news over here on in Wyoming, and it's with regards to the Cody Mormon Temple is getting the okay, but not the enormous 77-foot steeple. This continues to really is in the news a lot here. The temple itself is supposed to be 40 feet tall, but the spire itself is going to be another 70, and actually 77, and the zoning board has given the green light to the church, but they're pulling it back. There's 300 people that were crammed into the auditorium that talked about how they really didn't want a giant steeple. This is what it's supposed to look like here in the middle of Wyoming country, which is very open. It's very rural, and having the lights illuminated 24 hours a day or for a long period of time, and just dominating structure that's going to dominate the landscape. It's going to affect traffic patterns. There's just an unprecedented level of pushback on this particular temple that I've not seen before. What do you think is causing this? What do you think is causing this?
Yeah, no, this is an interesting question. If you look at the Preston Temple in England, there was a lot of opposition to that initially, from local authorities, the local community. It was a very large spire. It's adjacent to the M60. Whatever motorway, it was just off the M62. I can't remember the motorway. It's quite prominent. I think there was also opposition to the London Temple in 1958 when it was built as well. So the opposition to the temples are nothing new. I think we're going to see more opposition to temples, because if you look at I work in the regulatory environment on major projects. across different sectors. And we're seeing more regulations on buildings and manufacturing operations and commercial buildings, etc., not less. So the regulatory framework in North America, certainly UK and Europe, is becoming much more complex. And the processes for community involvement, stakeholder engagement, community engagement, getting feedback from the community to get buy-in, that has reached a whole new level compared to, say, 10, 20 years ago, where you could probably get, this would have been built without probably question. But now with all the new process and regulations, it allows the public to have a say in, whether they like something or not. To me, I think they look beautiful. I don't necessarily agree with all the building and expanding of the temple necessarily, but I can say it's beautiful, but I'm not living there. They might think it's a complete eyesore. But for whatever reason, and the community's feedback will be captured, and we can find out why they're against it. It might be a blot on the landscape. They might see the church as being dominating all the the entire landscape because it's quite flat, etc. But again, you're seeing more regulations, not less. You're seeing more complex processes in public, engagement and these types of buildings, religious buildings, not less. There's also political, probably opposition as well. There's probably opposition from other faith communities that I've seen in Scotland, where in Stornoway in the Outer Hebrides, they were trying to build a building, and there's a lot of opposition by the, by the local churches that saw the church as a cult, and they didn't want the Mormon Church to be, to have a presence or even have a building on the Outer Hebrides there in Scotland. So there's probably a number of reasons why, there's a lot of opposition to, to this building. And I've just cited a few of them. There might be others, but the feedback at those community meetings will be is in the public domain, and it wouldn't be difficult to find out what the objectives are.
Yeah, and the church has also announced, speaking of temples here, that the First Presidency has announced that the long tradition of temple cornerstone ceremonies that dates all the way back to Kirtland, all the way back to Nauvoo. Almost every temple has a cornerstone. Well, there's a statement that's been issued, especially considering that the temples are going to a more module type assembly, especially the Helena temple that we've seen, that they've been assembled basically off-site. They're trucked on-site and then assembled on-site. There's no more really cornerstones that are available. It's really kind of an antiquated thing. And Nebo the Mormon put out a very interesting take on this, about this particular statement. He said, "Is this the sort of statement the First Presidency should be issuing? Could it not have come from the temple department freeing up the nonagenarians to do some prophesying, seeing, or revelating? It seems like the items that the First Presidency weighing into, they're not weighing into background checks, but they are weighing into cornerstone ceremonies. It seems like the priorities here are a bit misplaced."
Yeah, I think there's some. I don't know why they're not doing the cornerstones. It's been a traditional part of the dedication of the temple, right? There is some symbolisms around and some history around that being the first stone. There's also an association with the cornerstone of the church. It's a term that's used, in the church. I think the Book of Mormon is the cornerstone. I've heard that before, etc. I've heard that the temple is the cornerstone, etc. The First Presence is the cornerstone. So the term is used in different ways to mean different things, but the cornerstone is is an important phrase and term in the church. I don't know why they're doing that. They should keep it. I think they should. They should. No reason to stop that. In terms of priorities, if they are, and the church has got a long history of getting its priorities wrong, or getting its, not prioritizing the right things, like protecting children, not getting into that to the extent that they need to. And being more thorough, more transparent, more accountable on that, and then having more articles on the cornerstone. I don't know if that's true what I've just said. I think the church is getting into the former more significantly, and that's encouraging. But I don't know why they're not doing the cornerstone. I can't think of any reason why they would stop that, to be honest.
Yeah, like I said, the modular temple construction, and also the ability with more temples to send somebody out to do the ceremony is probably limited. That's not the only thing, though, that is in the temple area. And this was released here just this last week as well. Temple recommend interview questions. My understanding is these used to be in the General Handbook of Instructions. Now, The temple, it says the temple is the house of the Lord. Entering the temple and participating in ordinances is a sacred privilege. To make the determination as to who is supposed to be able to qualify to go into the temple, priesthood leaders interview the member using questions in the LCR. Now, Ian, I've never been a member of a stake presidency. What is the LCR?
Yeah, LCR is, what does it stand for? It's the old MLS system, so Member Leadership Services. It's basically we need to go back and probably edit this bit, but LCR is the church
leader clerk resources.
Thank you. Someone had told me and I've forgotten. Thank you.
Yeah.
So leader clerk services is a developed MLS system, which was Member Leadership Services originally. That's what it was called when I was in the bishopric or in the bishop and state presidency. So leader clerk services basically is a operating or management enterprise resource management tool, which the church has globally, and leaders have different people have different levels of access. So state presidency, for example, can check to see if there's any repetition on patriarchal blessings. Don't know if you're aware that actually happens. There's a process for that, for avoiding repetition. Only state presidents got the authority to do that. Councillors and state presidency members can annotate records. They can check your temple recommend. They can actually look at the records to see if is anyone made any notes on your history, whether you accepted a calling or not. Any comments about the individual which are captured in this new system, etc. I don't know if actually bishops are aware of the level of authority that state presidents have. And again, general authorities have another level in that system. But if you have a recommend and they can measure, when you used it, where you went, there's a barcode on that, how many endowments, how long you were in the temple, etc., etc. They can actually measure your temple activity by looking at the leadership clerk services. They can look at your donations, your tithing, calling history. It's like a member profile, a database of members' profiles and their activity across different functions of the church. So that's what it is. It's an advanced, a much more developed system than the early MLS system. So
when I try to log in, when I try to go to the LCR, the leader clerk resources section, it prompts me for my username, and my humble level of access, Ian, does not get me anywhere. I do find it remarkable that the temple recommend questions, which I know they were released in 2019, and they were published then. But if there are any future updates, apparently, unless the church announces those to us, we won't know them because they're behind not a paywall, but they're behind the more secure area of the website. Any last thoughts on all the temple stuff here, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are 15 yes or no questions. They've changed in 2019. They've been modified. The church has got some pushback on one of the questions, number 7, about do you associate with any organization whose teachings or practices are contrary to or oppose those accepted by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Bishops, stake presidents, they memorize these questions very quickly. You do. I was doing 8, 9 temple recommends, 20 on a weekend, so you get to memorize them. So I don't know why the questions are not in the handbook. There's no reason why they shouldn't be. They're certainly on the website. They're all there for people to see. Those questions are measured. Different leaders they respond differently to those questions. Some people just accept them at face value. Others delve into the questions if they see someone hesitating, and they shouldn't do this necessarily. There's no reason unless it's to do with protecting a member. That's different. But some leaders use this I've seen this before. They can use it to control the conversation, and if they're not satisfied with the response, they can ask it again. And I've seen that it can be very difficult for the member. Most leaders are pretty good, and they take the answer at face value. In regards to the temple, the church has resisted until recently. I think there's going to be some changes here. The efforts or the idea of measuring temple activity. when we met with a couple of general authorities in the past, and we talked about this, we measure home teaching or ministering, as it's called right now. You measure tithing, by the family, by the individual. You measure tithing on the ward. There's certain metrics that the church measures. Temple activity isn't one of them, but I think that is going to change, and it may have already changed or about to change, or at least has been discussed at the apostle level, where they will measure, how many times you attend the temple, whether your temple recommend lapses or not, etc., whether you're full tithe payer. They'll cross-check, the tithing donations with the temple recommend. So if you have a recommend but you haven't paid tithing for a while, that will come up. The bishop's got access to all of this, by the way. So again, the temple recommend holders who haven't paid tithing or in a while, etc., all that gets flagged up. And the tithing question is not going to get changed ever. In order to get into the temple, you're going to have to be a full tithe payer. They don't know if you're a full tithe payer necessarily. There's also questions around limited temple recommends, which, again, a diluted version of the other questions. And they're around if you're not a full tithe payer, but you're going to do, some baptisms for the dead, or you're participating in a limited way in the temple. There is some flexibility on whether you should be a full tithe payer or a part tithe payer. Again, I've had training on that as a bishop and on the stake presidency. But I do see that the church, either internally right now and not known to the rank and file members, but probably will bring this, more into the open, where they will be measuring members' temple attendance. They measure it from a ward perspective. They measure how many people from that ward attended the temple at ward temple visits. So they measure that. But in terms of endowments, how many baptisms for the dead, all that is captured electronically in the temple, in the system, as you're aware of. And again, when you go to the temple and show your recommend, there's a barcode, and they'll know when you're going in and how long you've been there, and they'll know quite a bit about you in terms of your temple activity. So I see that as I see changes in that area where they will start to measure that kind of stuff. In the past, they haven't done that because they saw that being too sacred an area to. That's what I was told. To measure. And when we're on the stake presidency, the goal was to, when this came up with the general authorities, the response was baptize for the dead, for example, or do endowments for the dead. Let me go back. They said the goal for each ward in the stake was to baptize an entire stake for the dead, so to speak, or to do endowments, that many that you match the number
in a year.
Sorry, in 1 year. So if you have a stake of, say, 4,000 or 5,000 people in the stake, active in the stake, or even not active, do 5,000-6,000 baptisms in 1 year, baptize for the dead entire stake in 1 year, and do the endowments for entire stake, in 1 year. Those conversations, I was part of, but they resisted measuring. They do measure it, but they don't publicly communicate to people that they measure that, but they do. But I think that's going to change.
Yeah. And for our listeners out there, we're on Twitter. We're at @NewsMormon on Twitter. Let us know your thoughts. What do you think about the Cody, Wyoming temple? What do you think about the temple recommend questions going underground? What do you think the future of temple worship is going to be? Drop us a note over there on Twitter, and we'd be very grateful for that. Now, Ian, in our neck of the woods here, there's a very interesting article here that keeps persisting here. And this is, they banned a school district in Utah banned the Bible, and then also was contemplating banning the Book of Mormon. And the Utah legislators have said, not so fast. They are taking a look at this law of Davis School District in Utah banning the Bible, potentially banning the Book of Mormon. And they're trying to pull this back and say, hey, we need to keep the Bible in our public schools. And this has just really gotten a lot of traction. One of the reasons that it's gotten so much traction is the fact that Utah is a very conservative state, and banning the Bible in arguably the most conservative state in the United States, that's gone almost global. It's really crazy.
Yeah, this is extraordinary. Before this podcast, D-Bates, I would do some research, and I researched this, and I have some thoughts on this. So, Elder Oaks gave a talk a while ago, a few talks actually, on religious freedom. If you Google this, there's lots of his talks on religious freedom. Is an advocate of religious freedom. Him and I, when we were been set apart. We spent the weekend with them, or the afternoon there, and he was sat on my right, and him and I chatted about different things. Ella Cook was opposite. We talked about different things. This was the time of the Arab Spring. I remember all that was kicking off in the Middle East, and we talked about what the Lord had. We went off into other subjects, but he's a strong advocate of religious freedom. But if you look at this, it's extraordinary, and to some extent, it's quite absurd. Let me explain. If you have the Bible, and there's an element of authenticity and some level of historical reliability, if you like, with the text in the Bible to an extent. But there's certainly some elements of truth and authenticity in it, perhaps compared to the Book of Mormon. Many will probably agree with that. But if you look at the Bible and look at all of the issues in the Bible, and there's quite extraordinary things going on in the Bible, wars and all kinds of stuff going on. If that is a document of fiction, then you should ban all documents or stories or videos or books of fiction. Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, right? These are violent books and movies. Tom and Jerry, right? Whatever. Look at War and Peace. Well, let me go back. Let's just look at the fiction stuff. So anything that's written in a book that's fiction, Lord of the Rings by what's the
J.R. Tolkien.
J.R. Tolkien, yeah, the Englishman, the Brit guy. Well, that's violence, and so should you ban that, right? So if it's fiction, should you ban all fiction? If it's non-fiction, like the real accounts, first-hand witness accounts of the Second World War, First World War, and I've got a lot of material on stuff like that. These are survivors of the Second World War, people in Auschwitz who spoke directly and personally about those experiences, which are very violent, very brutal. Should you ban that? It's ridiculous. It's absurd that a school or a trust, a school district or an organization would ban these kind of materials because it contains. You might as well ban everything. How far do you go? Where does it stop? If you're offended by certain aspects of the Bible, which could be violent or it could be, other aspects, if you're going to introduce a rule or regulation, then that should be extended to all material, surely. So I think this is a dangerous, development. And I'm pleased to hear that hopefully some people with common sense, some intelligence are stepping in to say, hang on, maybe we should look at this very, very closely. Otherwise, you're going to end up banning all fiction and all non-fiction. There's also that interesting thing, that story that hit the news, I think maybe 6 weeks ago, where I think there's a school in the United States. They one of the teachers, of the art teacher, if I get my story right here, I think the students were drawing a depiction of Michelangelo, the naked statue, I think it was. And there was a complaint by one of the parents that it was pornographic or sexual in nature.
Michelangelo's David, I assume you're talking about.
David, sorry, yes, thank you. So that statue, which is famous, it's part of culture, it's a piece of art. You can look at it as a monument of pornography or sexualization, if you want. That's people's prerogative. But and so where does it stop? If we see art, ancient art that's been created, where does that stop? Do you ban everything that's like that? Do you ban all fiction or non-fiction? So I think we need to have some common sense. Hopefully those kind of heads will prevail. So it's common sense is the right approach, I think.
Yeah, definitely. The Bible, it is going to, according to the Deseret News, the Bible will circulate in Davis District school libraries and K through 12 because the school board has voted unanimously to overturn a review committee's decision to remove the Bible from elementary and junior high school libraries over, quote, age appropriateness. So yes, the Bible is back in Davis County. And, I assume that they're not going to ban the Book of Mormon, but it's just, these type of things, a lot of pundits, a lot of Fox gets spun up on CNN, Fox News. This made national headlines here.
Yeah, they might not ban the Book of Mormon because they might see that as being fiction, compared to the Bible. And there's a whole conversation about proving whether the Book of Mormon is non-fiction or fiction. What's the historicity of the Book of Mormon? Well, again, there there are opposing views on the authenticity of the Book of Mormon. The Bible, again, it's a different, it's a different argument, a different case. I think there's some authenticity to that. And you could argue that for the Book of Mormon. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where these these developments go. But I hope common sense will prevail. I hope.
That's a good sentiment as well. We have a Patreon site. I just want to make a note of that. If you would like what you hear on this particular podcast, if you want to support us, come on over to Patreon. We'd be very grateful for a donation there if you have the means to do so. Now, you did find, Ian, this next article here, and this was based off of, we just celebrated Juneteenth here, which in the United States, I believe it is something like 30 states recognize Juneteenth, which is the day that enslaved persons were finally liberated. Got the final notice on that, and the church has gotten involved here with Juneteenth here. Ian, what did you uncover with this?
Yeah, so Matt Holland, who is the son of Jeffrey Holland, he and I served together in Scotland, so I know Matt pretty well. Him and I spent a lot of time working on some material around the principle of charity from Moroni 7. We worked pretty closely with another missionary on that. I tracted with him, went out, knocked on doors, taught people. So we go back. Great missionary, by the way, great guy. And he's a general authority now, as you know. And so he was in Memphis, Tennessee, at the branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People on Monday, the June 19th, the holiday of Juneteenth, as you say, that commemorates the end of slavery in the U.S. And the NAACP and the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints announced efforts to ensure longevity success of their My Baby for Me program. Church is also donating $500,000 to renovate the Memphis branch there to continue to help people continue the My Baby program classes to teach about raising babies and caring for babies. I think it's great. I think I said at the very beginning of the podcast that our podcast here, that the Inside Out podcast, its aim is to achieve some balance. Where the church is getting it right and doing good things, then it should be recognized. Where it's failing and it does fail a lot, then let's shine a light on that and let's try to facilitate change. I think it would be easy to look at this story with Matt Holland with some skepticism, and I can see that myself, that the church is trying to continue to position itself to to show itself being an advocate for equal rights, regardless of color, background, etc., cultures, etc. Look at the history of the church. It's deeply, grotesquely racist. Look at Brigham Young, is outrageous racist, and a disgusting individual, frankly, in terms of how he thought. But he wasn't, no justification. He wasn't alone in that thinking. The church has got a deep, dark underbelly of racism institutionally across generations. It will never get away from that until it makes a formal apology. That would open up a whole series of legal cases, I think. But slowly, steadily, it's trying to position itself, reposition itself, and to say to the world and the members, say, look, we're reaching out, we're building these relationships with these other communities, etc., and we're investing. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's strategic. But knowing Matt as well as I do, I honestly believe it's at least on his part, it's a genuine thing. He was extraordinary missionary, and he's a extraordinary individual, and he was a very fair, very balanced missionary, and a very one who had a lot of integrity. So knowing him as I do to some extent, I see why he would want to be part of this, why he would accept that assignment. But I also see what the church is trying to do in terms of without sounding too cynical, trying to market itself and reposition itself and show the world and the members that it's trying to respect people of other color and other cultures. So you can see it from two sides. You'll get different opinions on this, but I brought that in because it's Matt Holland, and again, if you don't know him, you'll just see, you might look at this as cynical and skeptical and think the church is just trying to do a little bit of marketing here, which I see that as well.
Yeah, it's amazing how many connections you have to all of these folks, Ian. It's just that you've built up a lifetime of these type of
Well,
connections.
I'm the working class kid from a coal mining community with no history of the church ever at all, no pedigree, no legacy, nothing like that. Who was saved by the church? When I was thrown out and when I joined the church actually took me in, and I am deeply grateful to the church. It actually saved my life in many ways. And then this me not knowing anyone or not knowing much, no history of the church, putting my mission papers in and getting called to Scotland and being called with Holland and Jim Bennett and Elder Worthlin and Elder Hinckley and these are the missionaries who have a very different background to me, very different history, completely different culture, entirely different. We couldn't be any more different. And so I came into this very unique and somewhat strange culture of the church that was very, very new to me. It was a huge impact on me, but it turned out to be a big success for me. It was, serving the mission, serving the callings. I put my whole heart into it and really want to help people and really enjoyed serving. And the mission taught me leadership, taught me how to speak in front of people, how to have confidence and self-esteem and build those, which I didn't have, frankly, when I was young. When I was 16, I had very little self-esteem or self-worth. I didn't feel like I was worth much back then. And the church and the teachings and the relationships through people like Jim and Matt and others, other leaders and general authorities that I worked with, actually has been for the most part, a very, very positive experience. I would say 90% of my leadership experience with the leaders has been mostly positive.
Yeah, I mean, your life story is very inspiring, and I think that is the reason that your podcast has taken off as fast as it has, is because you have those connections, and then you also came from a modest upbringing. You didn't have a senator for a father, and to see the contrast between Jim where he's ended up and you where you've ended up, it's a great contrast. And that just reminds me of Ian, how many different podcasts there are out there. Somebody published this on Reddit just a couple of days ago. There sure is a lot of LDS related news programs. There's Hello Saints, Gospel Tangents, Mormon Stories, Midnight Mormons, Mormons Discussions, Nemo the Mormon, Priesthood Dispatches, Mormon Civil War, 21st Century Saints, Mormon Book Reviews, Scripture Central, Quick Media, the Glassbox Podcast, the Mormonish Podcast, Data Over Dogma, and a bunch of others. I mean, it's just really remarkable. And you joined in there as well. You've got the Inside Out Podcast. It just seems like there's just been an explosion in the last couple of years. And you look at how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of views these are getting. It's just been an explosion. What is it that's creating this level of LDS consumption that we've really never seen before?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think your podcast is quite unique. I found this very challenging, very exciting, very challenging, because I do a lot of research for this, which I thought was great. I said, to my wife, I've got to work hard for this podcast. It's stuff that it's current news, right? Newsworthy stuff. For example, first time this has been heard. I'll give you a couple of examples, which I think is breaking. I'll share it right now, and I've never heard this anywhere else. The church leadership are actively, from what I understand and believe, actively looking at AI to advance and accelerate its objectives, including but not limited to mission work, where people will call up and you'll be talking to a computer, but you'll be thinking you'll be talking to a real person. Also using AI to find. I deal in the world of AI in the businesses that I'm involved in, and we deal with AI quite extensively. And we're looking at AI at identifying customers, and actually reaching out and finding people to, for customers for certain types of partners and clients and merger acquisitions, etc. The church, I believe, and I understand from, let me go back, over the years, you forged these relationships with bishops, their presidents, general authorities, mission presidents, temple presidents. I maintain those relationships. I hear stuff, and I'm hearing that the church is looking at AI to advance its missionary efforts, to find people to teach, because it's not working. You don't knock on doors anymore. You can't, because it's a security risk, right? You don't want people knocking on doors. The members typically don't provide referrals. They certainly didn't in my mission. they don't do today so much, right? And the problem that young missionaries have got right now when they go and become a social media missionary, which is a completely different experience compared to what Jim and I experienced years ago, where you're in front of a laptop and you're talking to people electronically live. That I would hate to do that. I can't imagine doing that. That'd be awful. I wouldn't want to serve a mission. It's completely different to what I experienced, those traditional missions. And so look at the cost to train a missionary, to fly a missionary, to fund a missionary. The cost and the economies of scale technologically with AI to find people to teach. The church I think it's reliable. I think the church is looking at AI. The second piece of information that I've heard about, and I think it's reliable and I believe it, the church slowly but surely is looking at involving female leaders in callings and, more talks, I think, at General Conference, hopefully, and having, for reasons that, is it Roach mentioned in the reasons why, how she can reduce abuse in the church, by having more female leaders in the church in decision-making roles, it will benefit the church. And I'm a big advocate of that, by the way. Some of my best counselors on the stake and as a bishop were female. My Relief Society presidents have been some of the finest counselors and some of the best leaders. And I think, female leaders bring a very unique and distinct set of qualities to those leadership. So I'm hearing that the church is looking at, not right now, but in the near future, calling females into stake auxiliary callings. So stake Sunday school presidencies. So the presidents are female. And ward and stake executive secretary callings. Because if you look at the handbook of instructions, those callings have to be held, it's very clear, have to be held by a Melchizedek priesthood holder. If you look at the calling itself, Dives, there's absolutely no requirement functionally to have a male priesthood leader in the role of an executive secretary. There just isn't. There's no ecclesiastical component to those callings or responsibility requirement in those callings. If you look at the scope of those callings, what they do specifically, if you look at the calling description, like a job description, there's no need to be a priesthood to hold the priesthood. So there's no reason why a bishopric can't have a female executive secretary. There's no reason why a state presidency can't have a female executive state presidency. And there's absolutely no reason at all why the stake Sunday school presidency cannot be female, either with males mixed or entirely female. And I'm hearing, and I believe, and I understand these discussions are happening, that will happen or may happen at some point in the future. I do think you're going to see more direction and leadership in regards to female speakers at conference. The disparity between male and female is still a problem. The church is trying to be balanced, in terms of how that looks in the leadership of the church. You're looking at governments across the world, like Canada, where I am. If you look at the federal government, the mixture of cultures and people and male and female it looks pretty healthy. I'm not saying government should call based entirely on that criteria. I think performance and there's other qualities that come into that. But I think the church we're going to see changes in terms of the cultural mix, the background mix, and I think the male-female balance. I think we're going to see more females in leadership callings in the future and more females speaking at General Conference.
Yeah, I mean, you could have the president of BYU, for instance. That's not an ecclesiastical position. The announcer for the music and the spoken word, that's always been a male. There's no reason that couldn't be a woman. And there's a number of other positions that you've already highlighted that definitely we could see more leadership in. And what the churches struggle for, really having enough Melchizedek priesthood holders to be able to run wards. We've seen it only makes sense to open up more callings to women. In fact, the church has reduced the the number of people who have to be married for some of the callings too. For instance, in the young single adult wards, I believe it's the counselors in the bishopric do not have to be married. I think maybe even the bishop himself can be single in a young single adults ward. I know the counselors can.
That's right. Yeah, you're right. So if you're in the YSA, you can be single. We've had that in our stake. But as a bishop of a ward, a traditional ward, no, you got to be married. But the counselors can be, single. Also, if you are transgender but have not made the transgender transition is the word, then again you are a candidate to be called onto a bishopric, which is good. So the two hotline things there, or the two, the hot press items there. We're going to see a teaming of the Holy Ghost and AI. We're going to see AI play a more active role, I think, in church, including background checks. In fact, across every function of the church, you could close your eyes and throw it down, any direction. It's going to hit an aspect of the church where AI will be involved in some way or another going forward. We're seeing this in industry, business. We're seeing this with other organizations, the role of AI in decision making, et cetera, et cetera. There's some risks there. There's a conversation there, and I anticipate that we're going to see more leaders in these callings where you really don't need priesthood authority to. And you've given a couple of examples. I think we're going to see changes, and I'm encouraged by that. So
yeah, it's interesting that you talked about AI and the church being together. You've come to the right place, because I do have a lot of answers for people. I guess there's a bot out there that's called ldsbot.com. You can just go right to ldsbot.com, and it's an AI that's based off of the ChatGPT model that can talk to you about the church and the gospel of Jesus Christ. I believe this was put together by an apologist site. I think it was the B.H. Roberts Foundation.
There we go.
But you can type your most difficult gospel question into it, and it will give you a response. We're live, but let's just try this. By the way, all of our episodes are live on Sunday nights at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to interact with your humble host here, then join us on YouTube. But let's just try it out real quick here, and this will be our last article here. Let's ask it the most difficult gospel question that you can think of here, Ian. What do you have for the LDS bot?
Okay, so
Book of Mormon historicity. You did bring that up, by the way. Is that it? Or?
That's where I was going. Yeah, Book of Mormon history.
Okay, is the Book of Mormon historical?
Yes, that's a good question.
Okay, well, you talked about AI. Let's see how we do.
Maybe the general authority can answer this. Maybe the AI can, right?
The Book of Mormon is considered by members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to be an ancient record of God's dealings with the people who inhabited the American continent. It contains a history of these peoples, as well as teachings about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Some people, including scholars outside of the faith, have differing opinions on the historicity of the Book of Mormon. While there is evidence that supports the Book of Mormon's historical claims, there are also critics who question its authenticity. As a Latter-day Saint AI, I can testify that many members of the church, including myself, have a strong faith in the Book of Mormon's authenticity and its power to bring people closer to Jesus Christ. How'd it do?
That's impressive. I think we're going to see an extension of that, where you will actually have a live conversation like you and I are having right now. And you might not see the face, but you'll think it's a human, but it won't be. And they'll be having a conversation with like you and I are having right now. And imagine the power of AI, way more powerful than we can. So they'll have access. If you upload big data into an AI system, they can search information in a split second, and be able to remember and retrieve and organize and structure information bespoke to each question. I think this is where it's going to go. You're going to have a robot essentially bearing its testimony, and if that then at some point you might feel the spirit. So we're going to see a teaming up of the Holy Ghost and AI. Hopefully the Holy Ghost won't be made redundant and won't become obsolete, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, we're already seeing kind of that team up with the LDS bot, and I think that that's a good prophecy that we're going to probably see even more. Now, that particular site is not run officially by the church, but a lot of times the church gives money to these foundations indirectly to fund these type of endeavors. So it'll be interesting to see how it all works out. If you want to get in touch with us for the Mormon News Roundup, we're on Instagram. We're also on TikTok. We're on Facebook. Ian, it has been a pleasure to ruminate with you on the Great and Spacious Beehive.
Thank you. It's been an honor. It really has. I've really enjoyed this. I've learned a lot, and I appreciate the speed and the directness of the conversation. I really do. I hope it's been valuable for people.
Well, we really hope so. We think that we're the best LDS related news podcast every week. And, we shout out to Weird Alma. We use his music on bandcamp.com. And, remember, Ian, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
That's
so
true.
Long.
Thank you.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.